Welcome to Gunship.
I'll make it a bit shorter because there were a lot of really impressive things shown today. So I won't spend too much time on the infrastructure and code. But it's interesting to speak about the flow of data, and that's something we really talk a lot in the Axe community about the code and the technical aspects. But here I'll speak a little bit much more for the indie game developers and people like that. I will explain the data and how we carry it from the web servers to the games as Motion Twin, and it can be enlightening because it shows how much Axe can interact with other technologies and the data flow, especially for young people, a little bit younger at least. It shows what are the steps to do some stuff like that. So I will take a use case with Drakhanaj, my game, which is about Viking wrestling. You know, I called it slapping data from web servers right into the GPU. I'm from Motion Twin, which is a free-to-play pioneer, the Hack Mother House, and we are game jam addicts. We are very small, bossless, and self-owned, as you know. I'm David Elahi. I'm a gaming industry veteran. I'm a game developer. I'm a GPU guy at Motion Twin. I manage optimizing the GPU and stuff like that. And I'm a Axe passionate for several years now. So here's a good, I would say solid, because anybody can replicate it, example of a complex data workflow. So I'll speak a little bit about load balancing, how we did it, service dispatch, customizing the data endpoints, where do we send the data to the game to create an experience, and how having solid data flow would help prototyping and stuff like that. So data repositories, I won't say it, but we are manipulating big data with many users, so it's interesting how much by using the right data storages you can manipulate large amount of data without having a large infrastructure. We have only a few servers. We own ourselves 40 servers or stuff like that. It's not that a big infrastructure for several million users. So we use mainly SQL for consistency and performances. Then we aggregate some services from Redis, for example, for push notifications, queue, and stuff like that. We complete it with Mongo, which is really well adapted to small documents and tracking and stuff like that. And we use finally TorahShare to pump in some small chunks of data which should go between the services and between the client and the server. In fact, I will explain it with TorahQ a little bit more. So, for example, many people, yes, here have used Redis, but it's an advanced key value system which allows push notifications and stuff like that. It's really a data storage for such specialized values. It's really simple. It's a bit like Memcached, but much more modern, and it runs everywhere. So we use it to do the push pop of data and messages and push notifications, stuff like that. These are for short-lived data. We are sharing small chunks, and it allows on desktop PCs to replicate the push mechanism we can observe with mobile phones, stuff like that. We use Mongo. It's BSON documents. So it's a binary JSON. It's fairly efficient. We use it for fire and forget documents and incremental revisions. For example, it might be used for games which use logic of, let's say, an hotel, which we push the different revisions, and it's very efficient at that. When the data has low consistency need, it's really nice. And it has a nice memory policy because it doesn't write too much onto the disk and stuff like that. And it's really interesting for us as we have limited capabilities of memory output, it's really interesting that each services has a reasonable consumption for what it provides as a service. I don't see data repositories as concurrent or enemies. It's very complementary with MySQL. When you need consistency, you go to MySQL. When you need some much more short-lived data, you go to Redis or Mongo, etc. And with modern days advancing, these systems are easier and easier to set up and launch. So it might be a good investment for young people starting to really look at all the services and what could they provide for you. So I think it's important that we have the right storage for the right data. It really improves cost scaling because serving memory and disk write will really change from type to type. It's easier to support as the new servers are really easy to scale up, scale down, cluster and stuff like that. But in the end, if you have the right repository, you will just use much more less servers. And many users and fewer servers, the right service is always a win. Then is the load balancing. We use ToraQ, thanks to Nicolas, to do this. Basically, to improve the speed of the request and the serve and lower the server number, we just bypass Apache with ToraQ, and it allows us to really serve much more requests. It's behind a keep alive daemon, and we use some dynamically pulled weighted servers, which are hosted by ourselves in Paris. And of course, we use CDN to serve static data. And with this kind of infrastructure, we have not that many servers. Failures for us, which are a kind of indie free-to-play society, it's really important to rely on the community and to trust them to really address the right thing and be able to communicate with us. So we also have external monitors, and using the right service for the right data, it really provides the fact that the data clusters will fall down much less often, because if it's their job, their nature to manage that kind of data, in fact, even with single point on failure, they will usually fall down much less often. And of course, they do-it-yourself solution. When Nicolas did Tora, I think he really made the right decision, because he was just observing all these things, and in the end, developing his server was the best way to accomplish all the Apache bypassing and the memory and the threading, which is done fairly well. So, endpoints. So we are driving all these data flows to Twinoid, our social network, and Facebook for the next games, Android, iOS, or in your face. That's my favorite way of sending data. Thanks to Hacks, OpenFL, of course, NME, the same code bases are used for web and mobile. In fact, at Motion Twin, everything is run by Hacks, the financial report, the cache services, etc., etc. So we really share a lot of code. There are some minimalist proprietary extensions like small web views and stuff like that, but it's really a small amount of code. And in the end, by having the right tools and the right services, of course, you lower your maintenance cost. These are games that we authored during the year, and we made several tests on mobile phones, and it runs well. Okay, it's working, it's already on production, even if this application do not have a large user base on mobile. On the web, there are still a big community for Twinoid, the social network, and Streetwriter, and it will get in production for 3 games which are coming: the Monster Hotel, the Rockfall Journey, and Drakenreich. Low maintenance costs, it's a little bit more than that. It's philosophy. By using the right service and being not shy about rewriting, we usually, the flow we we set up the data flow and what we want to do. We put up with game prototypes in R, for example, or in Flash, plain Flash. It allows us to have live reloading and fast compiles. We can combine it with HScript, for example, to do live reloading efficiently. And then we design the first data sets in Web, Flash, MySQL, and we deliver it to mobile mostly seamlessly. Of course, there is always strong optimization phases because, well, you know, DeepKnight is really careful about graphics and he wants it to run really fast. We reroute then when we see a data choke point, the data stores transparently thanks to Axe and serialization, and it runs very well. So what to do with games, of course. Viking suplexes, that's fun. More games faster. It allows us to have a very small team of 2 person, 1 graphist and 1 coder to do games. So we are 10, but there are 6 or 7 projects in Motion Twin in production. And you can also use the same techniques for apps or websites. So the other day someone told me, okay, I have yet to see Axe running big apps and not just games. Well, games are very big apps, very complex to build up, and it's not it shall be proved that you can do much more things. Of course, this evening we saw many impressive presentations from Ka and Thibaut, and I'm really sure that Axe will cross the bridge for app developers. So we use Axe, of course, with the Axe dispatch for the web services authoring, Axe template Tempo HSS for content templating and hot reloading. We use Pure Files now for translation and HScript to design artist tools, and it allows hot reloading too. For example, to customize shaders or stuff like that. We use a framework which is called H3D, which is the ancestor of Hips.io, or its twin brother. It has the same genetics. It grew up a little bit distorted. We added optimization there, shader a little bit different there, and in the end, it's really focused toward low-end devices. It allows us to render thousands of sprites on mobile phones at decent performances. It renders to GL or Stage 3D, of course, and it's state-of-the-art 3D and 2D batching at several levels of automatic batching. There are complex shaders, there are blend mode like overlay within the shaders and stuff like that, skinning and morphing within the 3ds Max workflow. And we use also H2D, which is a subpart of H3D. It's fairly fast and customizable. It has a nice way to perform batching and an advanced shader control, as I said. We also added tools. For example, you see these tools allow us to detect the penalty on the GPU linked to the texture change, shader change, or the exotic shader. We call this for shader, for example, which have color matrices or stuff like that, which are really putting an heavy weight on the pixel shader units. Usually on mobile phone, it's where you will be killed. When there is a penalty, there is a problem. And also the draw call number can pose problem, but in the end, it's so fast that it's usually the fill rate and the shader draw calls that will cause problems. This kind of tool we develop thanks to HScript and dynamic reflection. We have Scout integration for these tools so that we can spy on the draw calls and stuff like that, frame per frame, timeline, etc. It's really nice. You will see really fast what is hitting performances for this game. It's really essential for us. Most of the game programmers in Motion Twin are not really big tech people. They want to do game design and not spend time finding loopholes. So we rely heavily on reflection and HScript. We use many custom shaders to adapt the performances on mobile and PC. But of course, you all know that that's fairly classical for this industry. Let me show you how to combine all this in something which is, I think, is interesting. This is an HTML CSS page. Actually, Here you have HTML, CSS buttons, but they are rendered by the GPU. Here, the surfaces here you can hit with your fist, your mouse fist, and the wall behind will explode in particles. Here it's a 3D scene, which is rendered classically with anti-aliasing and an overlay to perform I don't know how to say. And also, this is push notifications. We use, for example, this is a prototype I put up in one day. We use some textures, and then we color matrix using CSS properties, the texture, or we color transform the thing, like in Flash. So we can put up really fast prototypes, which will show up the interaction and how the user will have his eye rolling over the screen, and then we can really tune the assets so that they are really good enough looking, and then we can prove, okay, the attention is at the right place, we can iterate over this, and let's add values and assets and quality all over. It's okay, we validated it. So a screen like this takes 1 day or 2 maximum with one person and his graphist. It's really present to be able to hot reload the thing, modify the edge script, which is an HTML, CSS. You can hot reload it each time you change a CSS property or a color matrix or stuff like that. And it really allows you to work with your graphist really fast. And over the day, you can have 100 interactions with him and have the best result because you can move around the buttons, etc. very fast. Okay, so it's just like HTML, CSS without having to agree for standards. It's very cool. So we have all this data which comes from MySQL, etc., etc. We send it with serialization and obfuscation, some phases, with Tora to the mobile phone, and we receive this page which basically looks like HTML, CSS, but can totally go through the whole HTML, CSS of the web free-to-play game we usually did, except it's all rendered by the GPU and by a custom parser of CSS and HTML, which was done by Nicolas for comps. We just added some nice CSS properties that were missing. For example, is we have the doc, which roughly follows the Flexbox specification of CSS, but it's easier to have nice words condensed, and often we don't use very complex structures, so we've made simple layout algorithm, and for most interaction for games, it's really sufficient. We added all the CSS transforms that will not work anywhere, like text color transform, blend mode add, blend mode overlay, filter false, 8. Here I use some custom units. We are injecting units in the CSS engine. For example, this one is a 4800.320 scaling from the current skin. So if you have a full HD device, it will just scale the units in the height and the width and constrain it by the largest ratio, the famous technique by Hugh, so that we can inject custom units and really tune up the HTML, CSS to what we need now and really have concise notations. For example, thanks to Nicolas, we can also add jQuery support. So you can totally design a component which is a Viking. When the parser goes into this, he will instantiate a render node, which will create a 3D scene with a Viking in a render target with anti-aliasing. And then you can use jQuery to query the node and customize some of these attributes. Then you can, for instance, put a purchase, put a jQuery to decorate all the tree, and then put a jQuery to say, okay, now let's show stuff like that. It's really efficient, and it's important for us to, when you do big management game which are really relying on small interaction, in the end it will go just faster in HTML, CSS. But when we do sub-clients which are really game-oriented, for example, the loading page is a little game with a boat and sharks which are attacking it, I just put a little tag and I add a whole class which will do the 3D or the 2D rendering, and I will control in Axe all the rendering to have the best power and the best speed. So it's all about balancing ergonomics versus speed. Okay, so I said it, HTML and H2D forms comps for us. It's the same flow as regular HTML, CSS templating, except we can add everything we want. It's the same flow as all our data and our legacy structure of creating games. It allows us finer controls, and it allows pixel perfect UIs, because when you have the control of the units of the rendering, you can always fit to the pixel rendered, which really allows, even for scaling texture, it always really finer. It always has this per pixel feeling. We will add, for example, bicubic filtering for the shadows and stuff like that. It's important to us to have really a good quality. And in the end, it's really a nice path of production grease. When you have local templating in the application, because we can template on server, on client, you then have application soft updates. You can do fixing, and the scalable UIs are so easy in HTML, CSS compared to regular UI design, because you can iterate very fast with auto-loading, either the H script of the scene, either the HTML, CSS of the UI. So for example, this GIF, the content of this GIF I built up in like 1 or 2 days. It's really to prototype the UIs which are structured. For example, with the icon, buttons, etc., we just put up volumes. It's not like this in production, of course, but it's to show you that creating content is then very fast. So it's really nice to have fast iteration with such tools and concentrate on where we want to put values. There are also no compositing issues. For example, for people who use WebGL, there are fill rate penalties with WebGL and stuff like that. So here we are in a CPP native full speed GL component, which has the lock on the screen, so you can do very nice thing in terms of filling and shader, etc. So there is a finer fill rate control. It's especially important when you are on mobile or when the GPU are not very fill rate efficient. It's also easy to redefine structure when you need to remove some part of the rendering of the UI because it takes too much resources. For us, we don't have many time to optimize, so it's easy to have a fast way to do it. So I would say, why reinvent the wheel? Because in fact, deploying such a weapon to do games can seem overkill. But it's really about using the correct tooling for each data. When you do ergonomics, you need to speak with the guy from the graphics team really to match up what will be needed and to feel the buttons, feel the interfaces. So it's really important to us to communicate. We can then pull resources between pages and projects. We can have a backward compatible flow and then move forward with adding values in the HTML, CSS, and the new properties, but still maintain a workflow which is compatible with the old HTML games. And it's a very modern data manipulation because you can add in many other services or CSS structures, etc. Okay, so Dracanage is basically 2 people, Hiko and myself, and a little bit of the Motion Twin team. But in the end, using standard services allow us to do very better tooling, and tool we can build fastly. Using custom tools really allow us to have a seamless collaboration, and it's really important as indie developers to focus on improving and optimizing this relation, because we are not so many. It's really important to have the best productivity when we are designing together. Okay, questions? Nope. Yeah?
It kind of went a little fast. I want to make sure I caught it. For your server-side stuff, is that running on Nico? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Always on Nico.
Always on Nico. So you don't use PHP or Node.js or anything on the back end, just always Nico. And why did you make that decision?
Because it was, I arrived 5 years ago, it was like that, and Nicolas has detailed his views about Node.js, and in the end, it hasn't changed that much. Tora was already okay, and PHP, I don't want to use PHP ever in my life again, so.
Okay, cool.
I think I missed it. When you, what do you guys use to compile to native OpenFL? Or?
Yeah, we compile to Flash. We use a lot R because it's really practical. We could compile to JS, but WebGL is not ready enough to us, at least for now. And we compile to native mainly.
Okay.
On Mac, iPhone, Android, and all this. We have PVR textures and stuff like that.
H2D framework, which is open source, right?
It's open source, but we are not supporting it very heavily. For example, I don't know if it compiles against the current Axe release or the current OpenFL release. There are good chances that no, because in the end we were spending so much time maintaining libraries, we decided to just freeze every 3 or 6 months. So it's open source, and I don't mean to show you that to say use my drag or use my objects. I mean to say it's much more easier to make your tools and use good tools to make your chain. For example, Ips.io, I think it will be much more adapted to desktop and will compile with regular distribution. If you want to test, you can, but I won't be able to provide a lot of support. So I just want to show that we can do great things, efficient and productive things with Axe, and it's not just a toy.
Okay, thanks.
You told that you're using Tora without Apache, or
in fact, when the connection between the client and the server is started, Tora will take the relay and will bypass the queries.
I see, like using Flash sockets.
Yeah.
I see, okay.
But now we adopted Tora to push and pop in Redis too, so you can use different channel, either socket or Redis or whatever.
I see. And how do you do the server load balancing?
We use KeepAliveD with some custom scripts, because we often have issues with Neko when we are on experimental things, servers are falling, so we monitor them and reset them regularly. We are doing some custom script to do that.
I see. Very nice. Thank you.
Any plans to contribute back your improvements in H3D to Ips?
How many?
No, any plans? Do you have any plan to contribute back your change?
I don't know when, because I accumulate too many things at Motion Twin, too many jobs, and so I will do it when the game is out, because I want this to be out. It's too much time I have not out in the game. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to Gunship.